Hello, welcome to Relatable. This is your host, Teresa Freeman. Today I talk with Don Spears, who is a very good friend of mine. He currently works as a firearms instruction coordinator for ATF. Throughout our conversation, we talk about his long history in public service. He started his career serving in the military. He's also worked for the police force. He's worked as a Secret Service agent and now at ATF. So many great stories, interesting twists and turns, and how he's had to pivot and make some tough decisions along the way. He talks a lot about how a fear of failure can hold you back, and it's really not being afraid of the things or being afraid of failure. It's actually being afraid of the things that we don't try. You don't want to miss this episode. There's so much for us to talk about, and you have had such an interesting path. And I think, you and I've talked personally just about how important it is for people to know, like, there's lots of different ways that one can be successful. And there's lots of different ways that this happens, right? Where you might have a picture and an outcome for yourself. And then, it just varies, right? And as I was looking at, and thank you so much for all your great notes, but it seems certainly like you've pivoted quite a bit, and changed and made decisions, right? And you had a lot of crossroads that you can talk about. So maybe the first thing would be just to tell our audience what it is that you do now. We'll just start there, like what your role is now. Given the climate, there are some interesting things we could talk about, I think. And that without even realizing it, the timing of this interview, like, you're a specialist in this area. So I feel like you could offer some perspective there, but just tell me a little bit about your current role and what you do.
Okay. So right now I work with ATF Special Operations Division. I'm by title the Firearms Instructor Coordinator Project Officer. To kind of give you some context, every ATF field division has a two-man primary training cadre for that division. You have the Firearms Instructor Coordinator, who's in charge of all the firearms training, the ranges, all that. And you have a division tactical advisor who's in charge of the operational plan review, the tactical training provided to the agents. And he also acts as a liaison to our special response team. So that two-man cadre is throughout the nation. Mm-hmm. And my partner, Greg, he's also remote like I am. He's out of Utah. And between the two of us, we run the two branches, but they should be pretty cohesive as both those skill sets are interdependent on each other. Yeah. So that's kind of
and that's ATF. And just for people that don't know, ATF is what?
The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
Okay. And that is that under the Department of Defense? Is that it's something?
No, it's one of the main investigation agencies under Department of Justice. We used to be under Department of Treasury, but after the 9/11 Commission, they did some reorganization. They put us with DOJ.
Okay. And how long have you been in this current role? Like you're like.
I've been doing this job out of SOD for just over 2 years or a year and a half. Sorry. Okay. Prior to that, I was the division tactical advisor to the Washington Field Division for 5 years, and prior to that, I was a line case agent out of Richmond.
Okay, and you're in terms of your whole career, right? In terms of just supporting federal and law enforcement, if that's the best way. Sure. You're gonna have to forgive me. I'm not going to use the right language. I'm going to try to pretend like I know what I'm talking about, even though I don't. But just how long have you, right? Like, you've had some sort of role where you're supporting kind of in a sort of right?
I started off in 1996. I was a police officer with Arlington County up in Northern Virginia. I spent 3 years there on the evening patrol section. And then I ended up being commissioned a special agent with the United States Secret Service in 1999. And I stayed there until 2006. So I did 7 years with Secret Service. with ATF since then, and 3 years as a local officer with Arlington.
Okay. So I want to talk to you like specifically about, your path. And I feel like we'll get to that in a minute, just in terms of how this career, like how you've been able to find yourself in these roles and like,
Sure.
How did you navigate that? Because I'm sure there's people that listen to this that are interested in a career in law enforcement or a career that's similar to yours. And you've had a lot of what I would call like high impact events that you've been a part of, right? So we can talk about that. But I guess just because I feel like I wouldn't be a good interviewer if I didn't ask, given your area of expertise and everything that with what's just recently happened in Texas, right? And just generally, right, what's happening in the US. And there's obviously now another sad event that has propelled a lot of commentary and conversation on what this issue is with our country.
Sure.
Particularly in schools and as someone who is like closely affiliated to firearms and your job is that, I'm just curious what your perspective, and not that I'm asking necessarily for you to, it can be, I know, polarizing in terms of what people feel about firearms, and it's a very triggery topic, no pun there intended, but I think just maybe your comments on being kind of on the inside of that and what we're facing or what maybe we can be doing or, and yeah, I would just be really curious.
Sure. So just to, be clear, these are my personal opinions. I don't speak for ATF. I need to make sure that's, made very clear. It's heartbreaking, Teresa, to see these things happen. And, looking at the situation in Texas right now, a couple things come to mind. First off, I don't know, the timeline and story is changing almost every couple hours. And so I don't know that I'm really in a good position to comment on that.
Right.
I can say that from what I am hearing now, I don't understand how that evolved that way. But again, I wasn't there.
Right. Right.
So I've been involved in active shooter events. I was at the Navy Yard. We were there after the gunman had been killed, but the information we had was that there was multiple. And you just have, that was a different situation naturally. But let's just be clear. I don't know what happened there. I think the information is spotty coming out. So I don't want to pass any judgment on that at this point. But the biggest thing I look at with those events is a couple things. There were warning signs that just we didn't. I don't know how to say it. It keeps getting picked up. Hey, there's warning signs. We don't get it. I don't know how to fix that.
Right.
But social media is oftentimes I find it to be a very double-edged sword.
Right.
In so much as it's great that you and I can sit here and talk and share our conversation with other people, right?
Right.
But it also, sometimes I feel the communication is instant and it's not always in context.
Right.
So, again, we don't know the context of a lot of these events that have been triggered by social media things. I think it's become problematic in so much as information goes out, but it's not vetted and we don't know what the truth is.
Right.
Oftentimes.
Do you feel like, because you've been involved in several of these situations, I have two questions. One around what it's like for you as a responder in these situations, like because none of us, you're like, is it even 1%? Like how many people can really be in that scenario and be able to talk about what that feels like in terms of, we had talked about this before when I asked you to be on, like I was asking you all these questions about like how, like your frame of mind or your adrenaline and you had training, you had military training. We'll talk about that too. But, just physically, like what's happening and what that's like for you. Maybe I'll just start there in terms of being kind of the response person.
Well, let's, I'll put it in context, right? I can remember two different avenues of that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a police officer, that is instant. That is unfolding and you're doing it right then, and I'm not saying it was not an active shooter event as a police officer,
Sure.
but there are high stress situations that it's happening right then. And that is a huge, nervous system response that happens, physiological response that happens, emotional, the rest of it, that's all goes into it. It's very instant. Being on SRT, it's a little bit more deliberate in so much as you kind of have more time to think about it, if that makes sense.
Prepare.
Most of our operations, almost all of them are pre-planned, or we know what we're getting into as we're going there. So there's kind of a difference, right? I had some instances as a police officer that were pretty volatile, but again, it's instant, and it's different when you're driving up on something, or you're deploying to the Navy Yard. Like I'm driving up 95, and the whole time I'm thinking about things, right? So it is a mental and physical game to really set aside all those emotions that are going on, right? Mm. The biggest fear that I think anyone is, will I be able to do my duty, and will I not fail my teammates? I don't fear my own personal safety. It's failure of if I was to fail my teammates and get one of them hurt. That's the biggest thing that goes out there. And then once you get there, it's the training and your teammates, and they kind of ground you a little bit. And to say that I never feel fear before operations like that would be a bold-faced lie. I do, right? I have a wife that I love dearly. I have two children that are my world, and those are all things that get into it. But I have to put that into a different box and just be in the moment, if that makes sense. Not trying to get all zen on you, but that's just kind of part of it.
I feel like too, everyone talks about like how multitasking is not really a thing and you can't really do it. I would think in your line of work more than any, like you'd have to be so laser focused on like what's happening next, there's not any room for any other distraction. And presumably
there's
you're
not
trained to think that way, right? Like it's just.
I don't know that I can't think of the time they trained us. It's just an expectation. It's just something you do.
Right.
And you'll see it when, say if I'm running training and I'm watching one of the agents, and I can tell he's distracted. He's got a court case. He's got a sick child. He's got something going on. Mm-hmm. You'll see it, and they're just not. It's not there, right? And you have to be able to, you can never turn it off, right? I can't turn off the care and love I have for my family, but I have to be able to minimize as best I can to where I am focused on what we're doing in that moment. And that's it just really just comes with experience, and your expectations as a teammate and from your teammates, they expect you to be focused like that.
It's interesting too, when you said that, when you said the first thing is like your fear of failing your team or like the mission and not necessarily your own safety. That was surprising to me that's like the number one concern, right? Because as a layman, you just think, aren't you afraid to die? Like that would be my, right? And so it's just interesting that you said that.
Well, I'm sure that's that's out there, I don't, right. But that's not what I think about. I think, I know I need to this is my job here on this operation. I need to make sure I don't fail this, I don't freeze in the moment of decisive, decision making or something like that. Because that would get somebody else hurt. That's our biggest fear, for sure.
Tell me about how your interest in this career path, right? Let's talk a little bit about that, because I know you've mentioned like your dad was in military, right? And so and you have a lot of brothers.
Yeah.
So just tell me like, a little bit about like your background, and is this something you always knew you wanted to do, right? You always knew
Yeah,
you wanted
no.
Really? Okay.
No, it's funny. This kind of goes back to never listen to your 21-year-old brain. But it turned out well. So like you said, I'm the youngest of six, and I have three older brothers. All of us have been in the military, and then all of us had careers in federal law enforcement following that. I had two brothers with customs, one with FBI, and then myself
You must
with
be
Secret
like a
Service and
famous
ATF.
family in the whole agency world. Like everyone must know, if you use the name Spears, people must be like, oh, I know one of those guys.
More infamous than famous.
Yeah.
But I do run into people occasionally who knew one of my brothers or served with them at some point.
REAL-ATABLE is sponsored by TFA Soft Skills, your one-stop shop for workshops, coaching, speaking, and soft skills development. If you'd like to hire Teresa, visit www.tfasoftskills.com for more information.
Originally, again, my father was in the military. I was brought up. It was not an expectation to go in the military. It was an expectation to serve your country in some capacity. And I was free to make any choice I wanted. Again, I went to Virginia Military Institute. I started off originally looking to go naval aviation, and that I had some issues with a physical with my eyesight, which turned out to be a misdiagnosis, which I had better than perfect vision at the time. But long story short, what really affected that whole decision-making process to pursue a commission was when the Berlin Wall came down. And there really wasn't anyone good to fight anymore at that point. The military was in a huge drawback. Commissions were super, super hard to get. And BMI had just changed their mandatory commissioning requirements. It used to be required you had to graduate. If you graduate from BMI, you had to accept a commission if it was offered to you.
Right.
And you pair that with a introduction I had to a truly infamous Secret Service agent. He was the father of one of my good friends at BMI. Kevin was a year younger than me, but his father, Terry, was a career Secret Service agent. And that was the first look I really had into federal law enforcement and what it was all about. And that's kind of what really sparked my interest. So, again, 21-year-old brain thinks, hey, it's, the military is just not going to be the same. There's, the Russian bear's not out there. Of course, they're there now. History is doomed to repeat itself.
Right.
But I just made I don't want to say a snap decision, but a decision at that point that I was going to go try and get into federal law enforcement or law enforcement to start my career. And that was the path I wanted to take. And if you remember back in the early 90s, it was a pretty rough and tumble time in a lot of the cities, and sort of like the beginning of the crack waves and the carjacking thing and all that. And it was, that's where I thought I would find my service. And, again, my ultimate goal was to go to Secret Service and go to PPD and, be in the show. And, that was, then I had to pivot again. So it happened.
Yeah. So in terms of that, maybe BMI could probably be its own conversation in terms of that experience and what you go through as a young man through that experience and how that changes you. It's, you hear stories about these academies and how they work. And I just think, in some respects, like, it seems like it's such an incredible training opportunity to really mature and see what your strengths are. And then at the same time, it seems like it's kind of harsh and like very demanding, and honestly could probably kind of screw with your own like mindset and mentality, right? Like I'm sure there's like both sides of that story, but maybe just briefly for you in terms of that experience and like, did you feel prepared then, like now that you had chosen that this is what you wanted to do, was that the right background for you to do that? Did you feel like and you had mentioned too, like you played sports, right, in high school, and you went there to play lacrosse as well. Is that right?
I did. Yep. I played lacrosse there. So it's sort of a multifaceted answer to that,
Yeah.
because VMI is a big topic. And second only to finding Stephanie and eloping with her, that's probably one of the better decisions I've made in my life. So VMI for me, again, I knew a lot about it. I spent a lot of time there as a kid, going there with my parents. My dad was class of 56. And I also had two brothers that were there, class of 81 and 86. So I was in and around VMI quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I heard their stories and they told me about what it was all about. And, more so my brother from the class of 86, I was a little bit young for my other brother to really let those stories sink in. But I remember being there and I knew that was my spot. And I think I only applied there and maybe the Citadel. There's nothing else that was really had interest for me. So VMI was good for me in a lot of ways. And most importantly, I was not the model teenager. I got into a fair share of trouble.
Really?
Not with the law, more with my parents. I say I had a rowdy 4 years in high school. But VMI really takes and knocks off a lot of those rough edges. I was pretty full of myself when I went there, and I was shortly not full of myself. And it's designed to do that, right? And honestly, when you look at VMI, it's a 4-year evolution. It's not just the rat line.
Right.
And, a guy once told me, the reputation you make your first year anywhere is the reputation that will follow you your entire career. And
oh, that's so good.
while that may not be fair, it's oftentimes very true there, right? So I knew that, and I did the best I could. Going through the rat line, it's a little bit different when you're playing a varsity sport. You're at practices when the other guy's doing other stuff, but you have to engage. You have to be in it. You can't go there just to survive it. You won't get any lessons out of it. You have to get in a fight and take your lumps. But when you look at VMI again, and I told my son this before we went, it's not about that first year. It is a 4-year grind where your first year, it's harsh physically and mentally because you're just away from home and you're in the rat line and it's unpleasant. But you also have a lot of decisions that are made for you, if that makes sense. You have an upperclassman that is kind of your mentor that's there and they help you through all that. Well, when you get to your third class year, it goes opposite. So third class year, like your sophomore year in college, you're on your own. And that's what they often refer to as the academic rat line. That's when you really start getting into your the core classes of your major, and it's brutal academically, and you're starting to get a little bit of freedom. You're starting to get a little bit of decision making on your own to where your self-discipline is now truly tested. And then as you survive that into your second class year, your junior year, you're now getting more responsibility within the core. You're getting further into your major. You got to be pretty much set at that point if you want to graduate on time. And then you go on to your first class year where you're basically, your class is running barracks and you're running the rat line for the rats behind you. You're leaving your legacy through that. So every year has its own challenges, right? Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing that was most important to me going through VMI was the honor system, without doubt. The class system, all those things, those are, systems that make VMI's flavor a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But the honor system, the single sanction repercussions for violating it, and that sense of absolute personal honor and responsibility is what makes VMI VMI. And that's something that you can then carry with you throughout your life.
One of the things that I'm sure I told you this, but when Paul, we would all hang out socially, and we met several of your friends from VMI. One of the things that I think is so, and actually I have a very good friend that's FBI and several FBI friends up here. And, you have a perspective of what, the stereotype of kind of very like high, like ego, high energy, like kind of assholey type people, right? Because there's just that vibe, and it's how you're portrayed in movies, and it's kind of this like masculine of the masculine, right? And what I found in knowing you and knowing your friends and other people, like you're actually, it's the opposite in terms of the kind of Zen approach. You're kind of like outside of those scenarios. I've never seen you in that scenario, but you're very laid back to be around, easy to, so there's just something I think that's a myth out there, right? Or that training that you talk about in terms of honor and that can come, hopefully that can come in other ways other than just through kind of a military experience or an academy experience. But I feel like that's something that I've noticed, just like kind of observed, on the outside looking in.
Well, that's like the beauty of, and one of the reasons I appreciate my experience at VMI so much is several of my closest friends from VMI never went in the military, never went in law enforcement. They are absolute brothers to me. They're like pseudo uncles to my kids, but they are honorable men to the core.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to them about, being in the corporate world and stuff like that. And sometimes that clashes. Sometimes that's not an easy balance to make for them.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier in my arena. It's sort of an expectation.
Right.
But it's a little bit different. And that's a very cherished possession that, it means nothing to anyone else, but it means everything to me.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, I love that. I love that. And congratulations to Joey, because I know he just graduated. So
that's the kid you need to interview, because he did VMI better than any of us. So
I'd love to interview him. I would love to, if he'd be open to it. Let's talk just a little bit too then about, you said you set the goal to be in Secret Service, and maybe we can apply this in other ways, but I'm very curious about the ability to set a goal and see that come to fruition.
Sure.
And what is required, right? It's not like you graduated and you got to be in Secret Service, right? So
no, it's quite the opposite. Yeah.
So tell me just about your perseverance and resilience and what you did to actually get to that goal of being in that spot.
Well, so anyone who's in federal law enforcement knows that the application process is, long, it's arduous, it's brutal. But I'll give you one example of what that was like for me. So when I first applied in federal law enforcement, it was with the United States Marshal Service. Okay. And it's not uncommon to change agencies within the federal system. Okay. Now that the retirement is all one, there's lots of guys who jump back and forth. So the Marshal Service they were hiring at the time. And so I tested with them initially, and they have the same written, at the time they had the same written examination, preliminary examination called the TEA, the Treasury Enforcement Agents exam. So I thought to myself, I'm gonna go take this and see what happens. Right. And so Stephanie and I were recently married. I think we were living in Fairfax at the time. And I remember distinctly getting a very thin envelope in the mail. And when I probably shouldn't say this, but there's a happy ending to this story. I had a 55 on that, and I got absolutely destroyed in the math section. So keep in mind, I was an English major in college. So other than my rat year, which was calculus and some other stuff, I just hadn't done that forever, and really got hammered on that section. So, naturally I was not considered. So fast forward to a couple of years later, when I'm taking the TEA for Secret Service, what I did for that was different.
If you'd like to advertise with Relatable, please email us at info@tfasoftskills.com for more information.
I knew I had to train or prepare differently. I had to go about it a different way. So I actually, my daughter had just been born. I was a police officer in Arlington, and I showed up at Robinson High School one afternoon, and I found my old algebra teacher, Mrs. Alice P. Keene, who was a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And I came into her class afterwards, and she was very happy to see me. She loved seeing Lane. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And I showed her the paper where I scored a 55 in the math section. I said, "I need help." And so I went back to high school to my algebra teacher for several weeks, a couple times a week, when I had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off when I was a police officer. So like Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would show up with a kid in a car seat. And after she had done all her after school stuff with her students, and she retaught me all the math that I needed for this test. And
amazing.
Go forward, and I scored like a 85 on the second time.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's was a huge failure, right? I was devastated by that. But I had to figure out, okay, it wasn't from lack of trying. I just didn't know how to do it. So now how do I train myself, and how do I make sure I go into it as prepared as I possibly could be? And if it wasn't for Alice P. Keene, I don't know where I would be right now.
What I'm hearing too, which is amazing, and this is so important that people hear this, is because you failed once in a way that a system has said, you're not good enough, right? Like, you're not good enough because you didn't pass this test, and you're not good at math, right? All of us have these stories of what you're not good at. And the fact that you didn't buckle and say, well, this is just further evidence that I can't do this, and so now I have to choose something else. That idea of like, I can do this. Like, I can find a way. I can be creative. I cannot let this define me. I feel like it's just so important. It's such a great lesson that, if you fight through those tough times, and then it makes you appreciate it so much more. And,
For
right.
Sure.
It's a great story. And then what about too, for being a police officer, is that a prerequisite? That's not like an easy ride to get you into that, to be a candidate for Secret Service, right? Did you have to have some sort of other?
They typically want some type of professional experience. Law enforcement's a big draw to them. I mean, that gives them some metrics as, can you handle pressure? Are you okay around firearms? Can you make decisions? Do you understand the law, constitutional law, that type of thing?
Right.
The military is another big one. But those are changing now. We're seeing more and more people coming from all different walks of life that are students in our academies now. That, there's always a good portion that are former law enforcement from, either another federal agency and or a local or state department, military for sure. But it's a broader spectrum now, for sure.
Tell me a little bit about being in this. So once you get to the Secret Service, this is your dream and your goal. Tell me about that, right? Once you kind of get to the place that you want to be, and you're like, I've arrived, right? I've done all the things, and now I'm here. And tell me about that. What was that like?
So I was assigned on the Washington Field Division, and or they call it the Washington Field Office. ATF uses Field Division, so Washington Field Office, and that was a slap in the face at times. Like, they work very hard. You're not going to find people who work harder than Secret Service agents. When I graduated from our Beltsville Academy on a Friday, I went to work on Monday and didn't have a day off for 31 days.
Wow.
And that was it just so happened to coincide with, I got assigned to a protective detail right off the bat. That was a 3-week assignment that rolled into the IMF World Bank conferences that come to DC, which brings a lot of world leaders in. So there's just an incredible amount of protection operations that's going on at the time. So that's a different animal when it comes to workload and expectations. They are, I've never seen anything like it. They truly are a 24/7 nonstop machine, and they get it done. And they are and I've been around other agencies that do similar missions. They are the best in the world at that, at protection and dignitary protection, type of thing. I often joke that, so I was there, started off in the forgery and fugitive section, got selected to go to our counterfeit squad, and had very, very lucky, served under a brilliant leader there, a guy named Bill Albrecht. Learned a lot from him. And then from there, I was one of the senior 13s that's in that squad. That was kind of the backup for the 14 when he's gone. Then had a little bit of a timeout for a little bit. And then when I got to the protective intelligence squad, those are the guys who investigate all the threats and that type of thing. That was a very exciting squad, but that was, so when you say goal oriented, when I first got there, I remember seeing the guys from the PI squad that had come down that had just rotated off the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And I was like, who are these guys?
Right.
Like, well, we send 2 agents for 2 to 3 year rotations to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. And this is in 1999, 2000, prior to 9/11, right? So I remember seeing those guys saying, that's what I want to do. I want to go do that. And naturally 9/11 happens. It's, we were right in the middle of that. I was working that day, and that became my goal. I wanted to go to JTTF, and I ended up getting selected to go to JTTF in 2003 and spent 3 years there. And that's where I learned, and I got to get another pivot point.
Yeah.
I loved being an investigator. I just loved it. I loved the chase. I love the interviewing dudes. I love putting cases together. I love all those things. And I realized that 2 things I realized, that protection, whether it be on PPD or not, was just, it didn't push the buttons I needed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I also realized that, I've gone almost 7 years at the Washington Field Office with crazy unpredictable schedules, crazy amounts of overtime, the rest of it. And now I was next in line to go to PPD at our field office. Seniority wise, that's a presidential protection detail, or to phase 2. PPD is my first choice. And that's an even crazier lifestyle. You don't know what your week is going to be until Friday when the schedule comes out for the next week. We just had my second child, and I had an opportunity to apply with a different agency, and when they came back from their application process, they said, hey, we have a slot for you available in Richmond. So that was a really difficult decision to make. We had to sell our home. We had to do all these things. I had to leave for the ATF Basic Academy. It was very, very hard on my wife. It was a hard decision to make all the way around, but it ended up being the best decision we could have made. You know, we loved raising our kids down here in Richmond. I've really been super lucky and engaged and challenged my career in ATF. I've done things and seen things here that I've never had the chance to do with the service.
Yeah.
And that's not to say I don't miss the service at times. I genuinely miss a lot of the people. I have a huge respect for their mission, right? If I mess up a drug case, right, or a robbery case, or whatever while you're working, we can get that guy again, right? If they mess up something on a foreign advance, you know, they've changed history. I've changed nothing. So they have a very deep mission. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Well, and I think that's another great lesson of being, you know, certainly surrounded or in the field that, you know, you're kind of adjacent, right, to what you want to be doing, but it wasn't like, I love pushing the buttons or feeling like it's not quite right, or it's not quite intersecting, right? I do believe like the happiest people in their work are the people where you have that intersection of like, I'm good at this and I love it, right? It's both those things. And the fact that you were open enough to really, and make hard choices, like the fact that those, I mean, that's when, you know, we spent more time together when you guys lived here, you know, very close to your wife. And like, I do remember that being a very difficult decision, to kind of uproot, you know, your whole system, your family is here, right? All the people you were talking about. And like, that's tough. That's a hard thing to do for sure.
It was. And like I said, it was, I remember very vividly leaving my family and driving down to the ATF Academy. And if you've ever been down there, the water down there has a very sulfury smell to it. And
where is it? Where is the ATF Academy?
It's in Glencoe, Georgia, at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, right near St. Simon's Island. And the water, I remember turning on the faucet to brush my teeth, go to bed after I'd checked in. And the smell hit me. I realized where I was. And I just remember looking in the mirror and said, what the hell have you done? But you know, that rounds down range. All I could do at that point is engage as a trainee with ATF, do the best I could, and, you know, move forward. There was no turning back.
And is that like resetting? You had like amassed quite, you not just like technical years of service, but you were next up for PPD, and it was like what you want, right? Like you have to start over in effect. Yeah.
And for sure. You know, I was a brand new agent down there. I actually took a pretty significant pay cut. I went over as a GS-13. I was a GS-13 with Secret Service. I went back to a GS-9, and I had to, they try and, with the step increases, they try and keep you as close as they could to where you were, but it's never the same. But again, being the new guy again, being junior, I had a training agent. You know, it was.
It's a lot of humility, right? Like you just have to kind of, if that's what you want to do, and you made the choice, then you know.
Well, I think sometimes it's very good to be humbled every once in a while.
Yeah.
And to start off new, like, doesn't mean you can't be good at it again, or that new skill.
Yeah.
But you have to be open to being new and in receive mode, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah.
So it was.
Let's talk a little bit about just impact on your family, right? Because it's such a hard, my friend that's the FBI, like when he retired, he can barely talk about it without choking up when he thinks about his wife and family and how, they moved with him everywhere. And he's talked so supportively about her. He's like, everyone kind of talks about sort of the service oriented human and like everything that you're doing and your accomplishments. And he's like, at the same time, it's really that person that's allowing you to kind of do the work that you want to do. So I would just say and I've talked to Stephanie about this, like, it's terrifying, right? You leave and you don't know if you're coming back. But just also when you're talking about being in Secret Service, and I'm sure even ATF to some extent, like you can't be there all the time. So how do you guys?
For sure. And especially kind of, I probably travel more now than I did before. Just because being on SRT has a lot of deployments, training evolutions, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But no, it is, I don't think for a minute that my success is based off of my shining personality and merit, right? I know for a fact that I could not have done what I've done career-wise without the support of my wife.
Yeah.
Whether that be just the support to say, hey, you failed, try again, right? Just a strong, healthy marriage. And then to know, hey, if I do have to go for a couple of days or whatever it might be, especially when the kids were younger, I knew everything would be okay. And, I probably would get pretty low marks from her on a lot of things when it comes to the day-to-day house things and all those things. I do the best I can, right?
Yeah.
But there's just some things that she does better naturally. She's there, she's constant. And so that's, hats off to her. Behind every successful man is an even stronger woman who's got him there.
Thank you, Don, for sharing your inspiring story. I loved hearing about all of the different milestones throughout your career and all of the great advice. In particular, and it's something I've been thinking about since we had that conversation, is what you said about how you can improve a skill or how you can work to make yourself better at something. And I think the quote is, if you want to get better at something, suck less. I think it's something so necessary, and because if you just try to suck a little bit less every day, you'll see improvement, no doubt. Thank you so much to Missy for producing this episode and for Hannah for your support. A huge thank you to our Relatable community for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment and subscribe. You can find Relatable on your favorite streaming platform. Relatable is sponsored by TFA Soft Skills. You can find more about TFA Soft Skills and Relatable by visiting www.tfasoftskills.com. This is Teresa Freeman with Relatable. Until next time, stay connected.